What if there was more to prayer than just presenting God with a shopping list? What if I was to tell you that your prayers can have a far reaching effect that is greater than you can think of or even imagine? In this video, we will look at one key that will unlock heaven's power and multiply the effectiveness of your prayer. Hi, I'm Jeremy, and welcome to Refresh, where I love to produce content that will refresh your spirit, refresh your mind, and refresh your vision. It was a cool spring evening. The world rested in that moment between sunset and nightfall. The small group of men had just left the house and were heading up the small hill towards an olive grove. One by one, they began to sit down in the shade of the ancient, gnarly trees, and for a moment they sat in silence. The tall man began to speak. It was as though he was unburdening his soul. There was an intensity to his delivery that the men had not heard before. There was a hint of melancholy that tinged his voice. The men had heard their leader speak many times before, but there was something different in his voice. And as he spoke, it seemed like something had shifted, like something very important was about to happen. Jesus stopped speaking and looked at the faces of the 11 men who sat before him. I no longer call you slaves, because a master doesn't confide in his slaves. Now you are my friends. And as I read these words, something happens and I am undone. I am not a slave. I am a friend of God. I am not a slave. I am God's child. Let that sink in for just a moment. Because if we truly let this idea, this concept, saturate our spirit, if we truly allow this reality to mold our thinking, it will fundamentally change the way that we pray. The word slave here is the Greek word doulos. A doulos was either sold into slavery or born into slavery. A doulos had no rights. A doulos was a non-person. A doulos had no idea of his master's business. He or she did what they were told, nothing more, nothing less. A doulos had no permanent place in the family. They could be sold, shipped off, left behind, or ignored. But this is not who we are. We are God's dearly beloved children. We were born into freedom. We have been qualified to share in the family inheritance. We are part of God's family business. God will confide his secrets in us. We have a permanent place in his family. We are part of God's ineffable plan. We are included in his purpose. We are called to run alongside the creator of the universe. We are recognized as partners in creation. God has called us to unite with him to shift the very fabric of the world and all who live in it. Hey, I thought I'd just pop in here for a second and say that if you're enjoying this content, would you please give it a thumbs up and click the like button? And if you want to, even leave a comment below to let us know what you're thinking about it. Also, if you haven't subscribed already, take a moment and just click that subscribe button. Also, make sure you click that bell, because then you'll know exactly whenever I put out another video. Thank you for watching, and we'll get right back to the content. God has called us to unite with him to shift the very fabric of the world and all who live in it. This is not just a statement of our position or our identity. It goes beyond that. It is an invitation. It's a call from God to join him in his work. His desire is for us to partner with him, and that is so strong that God will often allow his resolutions to go suspended if there's a lack of people like you and like me who are ready to cooperate with him to see his will made manifest on earth. God waits until his people on earth are ready to bind what heaven has aspired to bind and to loose what heaven has proclaimed to be loosed. When Jesus was teaching his disciples to pray, he put it this way: "Let your kingdom come, let your will be done here on earth as it is in heaven." Often we misunderstand our place in prayer. We think of prayer as an outlet for expressing to God what we need. We do not see prayer as the act of us working together with God to bring about His will. Think about it. How many of our prayers are truly expressing the will of God? If we could grasp this principle, how much more would God's grace be released? How much more would sinners be set free? How much more would light push back darkness? How much more would justice prevail? Imagine what could happen if we took time to work together with God instead of pursuing our own affairs. But what about my needs, you might ask? Does this mean that Christians should never ask God to supply their needs? Do we ever ask God what His will is for us when we find that we are in need? When the river dried up and the birds stopped bringing food, the prophet Elijah did not ask God to open the spring and send more birds. The will of God was for him to serve the widow in Zarephath and her son until the famine ended. When he arrived, they were actually preparing their last meal. God's will for Elijah was beyond meeting his present need. When he stepped into God's will, God was able to provide for others and increase Elijah's influence. If we approach prayer in this way, our needs become lost in the will of God. And when we catch what God's will is, the question is no longer whether your need is met, but whether God's will is done. See, the true power of prayer lies not in how much we pray, but in how much our prayers are in accordance with God's will. And when we know God's will, we can approach the throne of grace with confidence, knowing that God will exert all the resources of heaven to see His will accomplished. That's all for today. Until next time, keep looking upwards, keep moving onwards, and I'll see you in the next video.